everybody back here to Segal Talks at the Martin E. Segal Theater Center at the Graduate Center CUNY. And it's a cold day in New York City, gray, and there's a big warning out for a storm that is coming, a big snowstorm that will also put the eating outdoors to rest. It's still incredible times, if I understand right, in one day over 200,000 infections. Is just unbelievable what we are going through in the moment. But we at the Segal, as so many others, we do think about art, about culture, about history, about the political context we live in, and how we can create meaning in these times. And artists have been always part of that discussion. They have helped us to understand better who we are, and through artists, through their way, we see the world differently, better, and perhaps we get a little bit accustomed to the future, and we understand the ideas of a community, of sharing moments of life here where we are on planet Earth. We are so reminded, as always, how precious it all is. Now that we lost it, a wrong handshake can kill us now. Who knows, some of us, some of the readers, some of our listeners might not be alive in a couple of months. I might not be, we don't know. And so, of course, it's a moment of deep reflection. What does it really mean? What are we doing? What is essential and what is necessary? What has changed? And what will change? And with us today, we have a great worker in the field of theater, in the field of writing, in the field of criticism, and in the field of editing, someone who has for almost 50 years now edited an influential, very significant journal about theater, performance, and art. It's Bonnie Marranca. So Bonnie, really thank you for being with us and for taking the time to speak to us. First of all, in the name of everybody, I wanted to thank you because in your great journal, PAJ, a magazine of performance and art, you published excerpts of our thoughts. It made us very proud, and it was a lot of work you put in, and you thought you saw something in what we did. So I really would like to thank you. We were so inspired by it, as we were with TDR. Carol Martin mentioned us, Richard Schachner, but also your work, as you have done over 5 decades now, is stunning. So it's a great matter of pride for us to be part of it. So thank you for being with us here in New York to give our yeah. So how are you today?
Oh, I'm pretty good. I'm fine. You know, just kind of deciding what I'm going to do today. I have various phone calls and meetings and things in the afternoon and reading, and I don't know, the days pass very quickly, actually.
Yeah, it's stunning.
Even if I spend the whole day inside, which I do often, the time goes fast.
Yeah, it does. So for our listeners, to give a little bit of an idea, we also have many international ones, which we welcome here on HowlRound and at the Segal Talks. Bonnie Marranca is the founding publisher and editor of the Obie-Award winning PAJ Publications. And this is her great contribution, next to many others, of course, but it's PAJ, a journal of performance and art.
By the way, it's 45 years, not 50.
Almost in the 5th decade. Yeah, it started in 1976 in its 5th decade.
Give me
and she has done so many awards for this, from Art for Higher Education, Sustained Achievement, the great and significant Gene Nathan Award for Dramatic Criticism. And she has really edited countless volumes of the journal, of plays, of books. Meredith Monk, New Plays from Europe, Plays from the Continent, Plays from the End of the Century, for the End of the Century, small series on conversations on art and performance, interculturalism and performance. She also writes about food, about Hudson Valley, about gardening, many others. She really is a writer and has a great love for writing and for the arts and for the culture. She is a Guggenheim Fellow and has been to Japan with the Asian Cultural Council, a great organization. She was also in Berlin, I think, in the American Academy, which is a very big deal.
At the free university on a Fulbright.
University
Yeah,
at the beginning, and then also Fulbright Senior Bogliasco Foundation, and she's a Professor Emerita of Theatre at the New School here in New York City. And I really, it's impossible to really sum it up in such a short time, Bonnie. Your work always made us aware that part of great art is a critical writing about it, almost an archival quality, that there's a record of this ephemeral, as you also wrote, you know, appearance of something, this apparence. And if it's not written about it, somehow it is lost. In this moment we are in now, where we all take account what we are doing, why we are doing it. Is it worth it? Is it worth the effort? Does it work? If you look at your work as a writer and an editor in this moment, what's going on in your mind? What are you thinking about?
Well, I guess one of the major things that anybody would be thinking about, you know, in terms of, let's say, editing the journal, because I'm still responsible with my now associate editor, Ben Gillespie, who was from CUNY also. We're responsible for 3 issues a year, and also with our contributing editors who are dispersed around the country. So the question is, like, what does one do at a time like this? Yeah, all the questions you raise, is it worth it? What is the value of doing things? How can you write? How can you address things? In the beginning of the pandemic last spring, I was in New York for 3 months then, during that time, starting the lockdown in March. I spoke to many people who write and who, you know, see many things, people in visual arts and dance and theater. And everyone said they just didn't feel like writing. People who are professional writers in the sense of earning their living that way, it is very hard to gather your thoughts in the beginning. But, you know, we went through different periods of like fear and anxiety, and then somehow, you know, adjustment and reflection and all these different kinds of, you know, feelings that that help us cope now 8 or 9 months, 10 months later. So the uppermost is the question, like, what does one do with the journal at this time? A lot of what we do is to cover, you know, current events and so on, and things that are being performed very, very, you know, very, very much of our time. So we didn't have that. So one of the things was that, you know, to perhaps cover artist documentaries. So like in particular, I had asked one of our writers to write about the recent Lorraine Hansberry and Baldwin artist documentaries. Other people wrote essays directly related to the pandemic and cultural politics and you know, funding and different artworks. We published the whole you know, excerpts from the pandemic section from all of your talks over a period of a few months. So that's one of the things, how to keep a journal and how to keep, you know, your publishing schedule. The print version wasn't sent out the first 2 issues during this time. Only the online version was available, but now print is available, and MIT has been able to keep to the schedule, and everyone has adjusted in terms of publishing. For my own work, I started, you know, finished editing the interview with the conversation with Meredith Monk, which just came out this month, and wrote the preface. And I also organized a book of mine that'll come out in the spring, Timelines. So I put that together. So I've always been working.
Yeah, yeah.
during this time, and also trying to explore and find out from various people who write for PAJ what kinds of things we should cover, what they're thinking about, what they might be finding online, especially things that might be dealing with new forms and new ways to cover work, or something special online. So we're still grappling with that. And I had also written to 100 of our authors over the last recent years, people who've contributed to the journal. And there was a list of topics that we posed. And so added to the usual topics that we're interested in, like performance histories, and also ecological issues and climate change. I was interested if people, were able to write or address issues like authoritarianism and fascism and this kind of politics. So we did get responses, and people, have been thinking about different topics and where they might fit in with this expansion of topics, in addition to our regular ones that we might want to address. So that's basically what I've been doing these last months in terms of writing or editing.
Yeah, I think you are such a hard worker. You work so much. It's astonishing what you produce. You're like a great painter, who puts out the paintings, and over decades with changes of colors, themes, structures, but still always you see the handwriting. I think this has been true for PAJ. I think you wrote, that the health of an art form is connected to the rigor of critical thinking that's circulating around it. How do you see the contemporary moment and the critical thinking about it in the theater? We just left because we're no longer in there, but even now where we don't have the theater, what is the rigor of critical thinking? Do you feel we are in a moment where this is taking place?
In recent years, we've lost so many different venues where people would write criticism. Traditionally, criticism over the period that PAJ has been publishing was in the Soho Weekly News, the Village Voice, the New York Press, maybe the New York Observer, in addition to things like the Times and so on, and also American Theater Magazine. So many things have closed. So there are online blogs and things, but it's not the same as a community that has access to, and generally people read the same pieces, and they become important. For example, in the establishment of the downtown theater, which we focus on, those reviews and the reviewing and the writing was also very, very important to people. And that was a time where people had, very high standards and for work, and were very demanding. A lot of people wrote books also and collected criticism. In this sort of vacuum, everything now has become mostly absorbed into journals. So in this country, there's our journal, the Drama Review, coming out of NYU, also the theater journal, Theater it's called, which Yale produces. And then there's Theater Journal, which is from the American Theater and Higher Ed. So all of us publish reviews and essays. And then there are many, there's so many journals now in theater around the world. There are also the British journals. But in general, criticism has kind of fallen by the wayside, in a sense, because people have turned toward theory, at least since the 80s. So it's become very academic and institutionalized, the discourse. And regular journalism in the newspapers or what's around, or magazines, is generally not the kind, on the level of what we had been used to in film writing, or in theater. So I think that there's a bit of a vacuum, and it's hard to know, like, why any one thing is more important than another, or why one should see something, or what is the broader context of something. So in that sense, that the kind of critics who did that mostly don't really have venues, and if they write at all, it's usually in a journal or in a book which comes out after many years.
Mhm.
And the journals only come out a few times a year, and they're mostly read online also. And one big change with editing and publishing is that people no longer read a journal from cover to cover and read everything in it. They generally have become so specialized now, since mostly academics read these journals, and that they read the work that pertains to them. So we've lost a kind of a sort of a core of meaning and reflection in the body of work. It's just very, very dispersed now to many different audiences and very specialized.
Yeah, I mean, it is a moment of loss, not only because of that time of COVID, but important, people. We have left overtime, not only Susan Sontag, Edward Said, Pina Bausch, Mus Cunningham, Harold Pinter, Ellen Stewart. It's a whole universe which you covered, since the very beginning. I mean, I have here some names of what you have covered on very early, as of course, others, but still you had Robert Wilson, Philip Glass, Meredith Monk, the Wooster Group, Trisha Brown, Robert Ashley, Maria Irene Fornes, Laurie Anderson, George Maikunas, Namjoon Pike, and of course the list goes on and on. Caroline Schneeberg and John Jonas. It is an incredible discourse. I think someone wrote, I think once, an essay, why can't we stop talking, about the 70s, Edmund White or someone,
Mhm.
You have a unique perspective, someone like Schechner or also Marranca, and for looking over decades on the field. What are your reflections on the impact on the moment of how would I say, the theater, the performance to New York City? It has changed so dramatically. What do you think are we going through right now at this moment?
It's such a big question. I don't know if we know really where we're going, because until we come out of this pandemic situation, we don't know what the finances are, if and when audiences will return to the theater, what the situation is for all the people who are working in it. And I'm concerned, of course, as an editor and a writer and theater goer, to see how this terrible experience, this existential crisis in a way, and financial crisis, how and health crisis, how it affects people's thinking. Will there be a different psychology of character? How will people think of space? What will the notion of truth, how will that be dealt with in an era which has been called post-truth time? And also, what does reality and realism mean now, when so much of what we see has been called into question and denied? So I can't really predict what will happen. For myself, I would like to see more of an emphasis on writing in the theater, which is to say, new forms of dramatic writing, new forms of new play and theater forms.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You wrote in one of your essays or interviews where you said there is a general disregard of working with writers you detect at the moment a bit in the scene. You're a big supporter of dramatic writing. Do you think this will change, or we will see?
Well, we've kept to our original mission, which is to publish a play or performance text, but that has very wide parameters. Includes any kind of text or avant-garde piece of writing. not what we think of as conventional plays. But we still do that in every issue, and have published over 1,000, and especially plays in translation, or plays, or plays from the more unconventional, non-mainstream theater downtown. But definitely over at least 20 years, or if not more, 25, there's been a move away from dramatic literature once one passes the undergraduate level in terms of theater study, on the graduate level and the PhD level, and even in terms of the kinds of contributions we get to the journal, or what you see in other journals. People are not writing about dramatic literature, playwriting as much as they used to before. Instead, we've moved toward what many people call devised theater, a theater that's more built on the intersection of many different kinds of texts, or more like a collage structure, and often definitely not with the writer at the center of theater, but maybe put together by a group of actors, or put together by the director. And I don't really consider this as complex a form in most cases as writing. So looking toward the future, I would like to see a kind of philosophic, poetic theater, with also a lot of new experimentation in terms of forms of writing, real avant-garde writing. So I hope that returns, and maybe it's on its way because of the sense of privacy we have now in spending a lot of time at home and not working together. I don't know. Different forms produce different kinds of language and different kinds of acting. So it remains to be seen where we will go, in the future.
Yeah, I think early on, here and that's kind of, when you said pre-performance, I think you wrote about new forms of writing and art, that we need to have critical standards of value and comparison, that this is the contribution you make and others make, TDR makes, our journals. You say there's a difference between criticism and writing. Where do you draw the difference?
Oh, yeah, I've always made a difference between writing and criticism. But now we don't have criticism so much in terms of the world we exist in, because a lot of it is theoretical writing done by academics rather than journalists. But quite a while ago, in the mid '80s, I called my first book, my first collection of work, Theatrewritings, and that was a direct opposition to theater criticism. Now, of course, I've always valued criticism, and sometimes I use the terms interchangeably. But what I meant by writing at that time was that I consciously developed over the decades now in my writing the intimacy of the personal, of the voice. I like to write work that you can speak, that you could. That's not like reading a text or reading an essay. I tried to really, and I promote this with people who write for the journal as well, to bring their critical voice to the forefront. So I'm interested in poetic techniques and techniques of the novel, and writing that people who are not necessarily doing academic writing have brought into their own works or their essays. Like, there's so many good essayists now. Siri Hustvedt, Marilyn Robinson, Teju Cole, Daniel Mendelsohn, Zadie Smith. They're just innumerable good essayists, and none of these works are theoretical, and they're not filled with jargon. They're real writers thinking. I love the work of William Gass or Sontag or Brodsky or Octavio Paz, Elizabeth Hardwick, real writers and literary stylists. So that's what I meant by theater writing, to bring different kinds of techniques, not previously brought into, or what was considered, kind of rigorous critical writing, but to capture the quality of the voice and have a kind of literary quality. Now I realize that might not be certainly not in fashion in the academic world, because people have been forced into a certain way of writing. But I find that I'm able to get writers who write in a more literary, journalistic way. It's a kind of high journalism, in a sense. And they have different kinds of writing, some for their academic credentials, and others they'll write in this style in PAJ, and they're happy to do it. So that's what my vision of how I contrasted theater and writing and criticism.
That often also, novelists or essayists will write very complex subject matters, but in a language that is accessible and understood. Meanwhile, perhaps in some part, writing or criticism on theater, when it comes to the abstract formulation of theories and art, it's no longer as easy to access. You also say, you define your work at PAJ to say it's a critical thinking against the current. It's something you should have a new form, as you said, with a standard. It should be the things we already do not know. You say, so many write about things we already know, the artists we have seen. What do you feel do we need now? If you say it's against the current, which also means that it has been achieved something, but now it's the next. It's not there, as Barth said about democracy, or something. That it's never there. It's coming. It will be with us. It's never been achieved. I think Cardoso, the Supreme Court justice, said that that law it's on some wall in New York. It's always coming. It's not here yet. So what are we writing about? Are you writing about the current now? What do you say? What voices do we need to hear?
Of artists or critical voices?
Critical voices in the moment, yeah, and perhaps connected to artists, but of critical voices.
I have an Italian friend. He's a scholar and wrote many books in Italy and ran festivals and organized encyclopedias and everything, Antonio Attizani. And he said many years ago when we had a conference in New York connected with NYU that a critic can't wait for a theater. So in a way you have to create your subjects, which is also what I tried to do. I tried to bring my theater and arts interest into writing about other things. You mentioned earlier about my food book and my book on the Hudson Valley and book on gardening. But they're not all real separate categories. They intersect. For example, in an essay more than 30 years ago that I wrote about Chekhov, I tried to create a fictional section in it. I created a fictional section in one of the sections of that essay, and I wrote about Chekhov as a gardener. I'd read his letters and I knew how much he was interested in his rose bushes, and he wrote about them and everything.
You wrote about Pirandello because the name Marranca, comes.
Yeah.
Comes
Marranca was a porter in one of Pirandello's plays, which is, I said, why the Marrancas came to America.
Incredible. If I know right, you worked over a year, just on one essay, for.
I could do that at one time. I spent about a year with that. And you know how I put it together. I wrote it in separate sections, and there are maybe 10 or 15 or 20 sections, and I spread them out on the floor, and I kind of figured out how they would go together, and that's how I wrote the sequence. But I was actually very proud because Susan Sontag had complimented me on that essay, and after thinking about it for many years, I thought maybe it might have been because I said that Pirandello had an argument against photography in his work. So I always thought to myself, maybe that's why she liked it. I don't know, but since I admired her so much, that was a big thrill for me to have that from her in the mid 80s.
maybe connected to her, also an essay, about the suffering of others, which, really also really critically looks at photography and the representation
Mhm.
of an image.
By the way, speaking of that, I had a long conversation with her of some months before she died, but maybe 8 months or so before she died. And at the time she said she was reading the biography of Goya. And Goya, the cover of that book regarding the pain of others is a Goya.
Yeah, and she talks about it also in a most significant essay, also that Trevor Floyd, of course, but also the time we live in. How do we represent? I mean, it's an incredible project, PAJ magazine. If I may say that, if I understood right, instead of writing, the dissertation, you and Gautam Dasgupta, who were the great founders of this, instead of writing on Bob Wilson or on, I don't know what you were right about. You said, let's do our journal. This is going to be our dissertation. Of course, you ran into trouble and it wasn't accepted. And you said, I never want to be in places where I'm, in working places also where I fenced in. I need my freedom. So you created something you also called an alternative to performance studies, a field of, where you can, a garden where there are offerings out. You say you write out of love, actually, that the joy, the enjoyment is important of you. It's, as you said, a place for thinking out loud, what we do in a way at the Segal Talks. So I think your deep belief in the gravity of words and to make the process of thinking visible, and it's archived, it's there. 200 years from now, 300, a lot of stuff will be gone. Nobody will know, but people will be able to read PAJ, TDR, and writings, about this time.
And people don't realize that because the focus is so much on production. For those of us who write criticism or even publish plays and things, the foundations never supported things like that. They were always interested in supporting a production, not a publication of a play. And many people have the false sense that the production is the most important thing. Of course, it's important to get the work known, but the plays will disappear if they're not published. For example, we published Irene Forness in 1977, right at the time she did FEFU, but except for Adrienne Kennedy, all of her peers are forgotten. Remember, Irene had a theater, the theater strategy producing agency for playwrights that Julie Babasso, Rochelle Owens, Ronnie Tavel, Adrienne, and Irene were involved in. So many plays and playwrights have disappeared. There's so many names I can mention from that period. They're all gone. Unfortunately, the theater has not been very good about preserving its legacy, unlike the art world or the dance world. Everybody moves on. Like, I've been shocked to learn how few people that I'd come across in publishing PAJ had ever studied or knew of Reza Abdo or the Squat Theater. And my feeling is they probably don't know the open theater. Theater study changed so much, and academia changed so much that the curriculum, was really totally revamped around theory. And so I think a lot of people aren't really given the tools. But the archival aspect, I know because I'm working on our archive now with a consultant, and I've saved everything for 45 years, of all the correspondence and all that. This is really important as a record. So much of what any magazine or review covers really is the foundation of creating theater history or performance history or visual arts. It's really the books and the publications that are so important in keeping work alive so that it can get in the repertoire and so that it can be studied. Because sometimes people are forgotten in their own time, and then someone finds them, and maybe 20, 30 years later, they are looked at again. I think, with the case of Adrienne Kennedy now and all the focus on her, that's a case where that is happening, or it did, in recent years when Reza Abdo had the exhibit at PS1 in Queens. So saving these materials and having the manuscripts or things in print is very important. videos now as well.
Mm-hmm. So how do you approach writing editing? What is your process? How do you think about the craft of writing and editing? What, for everybody who listens and is in the field, what do you think is of importance?
When you say the craft, you know, you just have to keep writing and writing and writing. You know, one just sits down with the blank page, like a painter might sit down with the blank canvas. You hope the ideas come. You mentioned earlier that an essay, the Pirandello essay that took a year. I also spent a year on Gertrude Stein, who had always been an obsession of mine from graduate school. I read and read and read and take notes. I think I had about 90 pages of notes for Gertrude Stein, and then you just sit down with a blank piece of paper. I have a system for generating my notes all on loose leaf paper, coded with what the topic is, and I try to cover things in my notes and my thoughts, but I never outline anything. I don't do abstracts or all that. I do a lot of rewriting. I used to write longhand, but you know, since the 90s, at least mid 90s, I worked on a computer. But I used to do everything longhand and then type it. I think writers are always readers. Certainly that's the case with poets and novelists. I'm not sure to what extent, say, people writing about theater are reading novels or reading other essays. I've always loved the essay. And I've always been an editor or connected with journalism from high school. I was an editor on my high school paper. And in college, I started the drama and arts page of my college paper and began writing. I don't know where the impulse came from, but I just wanted to write about work. I was never tempted to perform or act or do anything or direct or anything like that. But and then when I came to New York in the early 70s, I also worked for other publications, and Changes, for example, which was a wonderful downtown arts publication that was edited by the wife of Charlie Mingus, the jazz musician. Wow. And then Soho came along, and then PAJ, we started PAJ in 76. So
for Rolling Stones, right?
I did. I wrote for, I was a music critic, and I wrote for Crawdaddy and Rolling Stone, and
you worked for Max Eisen, Broadway agent, so it's quite.
I did a lot of things. I worked for a very famous Broadway agent. We had an office in the Sardi building. He was a press agent. He was very well known. Mm-hmm. So I did a lot of things. I wrote for also. I mean, I worked for a producer of jingles. And that was when Barry Manilow was writing a lot of jingles, and Carly Simon was coming up and all that, and they would come through our office. So I found my way to graduate school. And at that time, you know, I was also doing a lot of freelance work. Then we started the journal. But what I'm saying is, like, from high school to now, I've been an editor or working in journalism.
Yeah, so you have been trained. I know Lillian Hellman, the great playwright, was one of your teachers. The great Harold Cluman.
Harold Cluman, yeah.
Who came from the group theater, who has influenced American theater, and actually, as many say, you know, actually also influenced American film. Film acting in American comes from, of course, the acting studio, but he made a case, or many do make a case, to say, actually, you know, the way the group theater performed, and many of the actors went to Hollywood, this created the American acting. You were trained by Daniel Gerald, by Andrzej Wierto, who we both know so well. When it comes to writing and editing, what do you keep in mind? What are the lessons? If we say we perhaps a lot of people are moving away a little bit from it at that time we are in, what is the beauties, the mysteries, but also what are your secrets? How do you? What is of importance?
Well, you know, I started to say that I've always loved the essay. I like it because it's reading thinking, and that appeals to me very much. Just simply the engagement with mind. I love the form. I love the form of the essay, and I've been reading essays and journalism since undergraduate days. I read a lot of different kinds of work extensively, but since you mentioned some of these teachers, I wrote an essay about Lillian Hellman also in that same book, Theatrewritings. And what I studied with her at Hunter College for 1 or 2 courses, and I think in creative writing or something, but not in theater at all. But I love the way that she said the word writer, and that's what I wrote about in my essay. As far as Dan Gerald, excuse me, the way I take notes for my writing is based on the way I took notes in his class. Dan Gerald was a great teacher, and we studied in a way that people don't study anymore. For example, you might take a whole semester on comedy or melodrama or tragicomedy, or say avant-garde plays between the wars, or things like that, and dramatic structure. That was his big set course, 2 semesters of that. So he very much taught from the point of view of structure, and that's the way I approach work also. Just really take apart the mechanics of the work and try to put it back together. Let the work speak to me, and keep reading it, or looking at it, taking notes. I don't take notes when I go to the theater, though. So with Dan's method, that's how I arrived at my method that I had described about, loose leaf paper and taking notes and having the subject of that note, and then somehow coordinating and putting it together. But it directly comes from the method of his classroom. As far as Andrzej Wirt, he was a great figure in education for changing the German system after he left the United States and went back to Germany, where he founded the theater science division or department at Gießen near Frankfurt. And he was one of the most brilliant, imaginative people I know. And I know a lot of really smart and brilliant people, but the way that he saw everything in this kind of dialectical way was also a kind of training and humor that he brought, in his great loyalty and friendship. But he was teaching Heine Müller and ideas about the post-dramatic in the early 70s at CUNY. So we then became lifelong friends, and I often stayed with him in Berlin, or he stayed in my apartment here. But he just saw everything in a very different way, and he was very aesthetically inclined. So, I mean, these are just a few of the
Clurman, tell us.
Came in close contact with.
Harold Clurman,
Harold Clurman was so inspiring. I remember him jumping up and down in class and turning red. We were all afraid he was going to have a heart attack. He was an old man then. He was also at Hunter. I think that it's not necessarily that you learn, rules or techniques or methods from people. It's not like studying acting when you're in a classroom or you're reading criticism or something. It's more a person's work ethic and spirit and energy that flow through, or their rigor and their attachment to their field. I'm very much admiring of work ethics. That's why I love Chekhov. And I think that's attracted me so much to plays of Irene Forness as well. The work ethic. I've come from the middle class, and I worked all the time since high school. And work is a certain kind of commitment, and it's a commitment to a certain set of values, and that's what you learn from people. You're on your own in terms of developing techniques and styles, and you hope they come. You hope you have ideas from seeing things. I don't write any more about work that doesn't really appeal to me, or I don't like. Just as I no longer have a year to spend on an essay, I don't feel like writing anymore about artworks that just don't move me in some way.
So you really say, you see, a couple of times it came up, you say, I write out of love for what I see or what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I love art. I love the idea of performance. I don't, I write out of love for a work, out of somehow, not all the times, and I mean, not all the times in my life, and not every single moment. But in choosing work, there is a certain amount of love or a certain sense of living in that landscape or understanding work. It's very hard to write. It's hard to write about something that you're half interested in or so. I mean, I love writing, and I love the essay, as I said. Just the exercise of thinking about art and going deeply into something is mysterious and beautiful, and it's also it's a private act in a way. I love the way some artists, the certain sense of striving for grace, and people who have a real value system in their work. That attracts me more and more. Though, to be honest, I have maybe less interest in writing about art now, writing about the arts. I don't know. I don't know what I'll do after this book of mine comes out in the spring, which is 10 years of my essays and interviews and conversations with artists. I really like talking with artists. I like the conversation form. I spent a lot of time during this lockdown period of listening to conversations with writers, particularly novelists or writers and thinkers. And at different periods in my life, I turned to other things like the garden writing or the Hudson Valley book or food writing. I'm not worried about what I wanted to do next. I don't have that sense of compulsive productivity. It's fine if I don't have something in mind to start the day after I finish something else. It's okay, I don't know what, the world is so complex now, and it's so difficult to place oneself. There's so much of everything. There's so much of every kind of commentary, and there's such a proliferation of things. It's hard to just decide what is to start out, to say where you started out earlier about what is meaningful now. That's the question. What is meaningful? It's not a question of just doing something for the sake of doing it, but what is the real value of it, and where does it take one?
Yeah. I think in that great issue of being here, PAJ 100 after 100 issues, and I know you now since going online with MIT next to the print issues, and it's a miracle it's still out in print, but you have 120 countries, you have readers from all around the world. But the question is, what you wrote is, how should I act in the world?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, Camus says, I love Camus' writing, and I've often taught and read his essay, Create Dangerously, which was his Nobel Prize speech. But he says that, you can't run away from the world, but you can't also be overtaken by it, in a way, the question now that I've asked myself also is, in the midst of all this destruction and all the anxiety and anger that so many people have felt in these last 4 years with the government, the shock of seeing how quickly our democracy can collapse, and that the people that we counted who run the government, that to just let it go if they could. So I asked myself over the summer too, when I was out in the city and just enjoying nature. I feel that you have to preserve some sense of happiness and joy for yourself. I'm basically a contented person, as opposed to being depressive, and I feel like I have to preserve something like that. You can't get up every day and be overwhelmed by all the world's problems. But of course, to be a thinking, acting person, you need to know that and absorb that in your work, whatever work you do, teaching, writing, any field. To go back to Camus, he says also that every person has something to contribute to the world, to change the world, to make it different. And it's not that artists can just do that. Any ordinary person, every day you see simple acts of beauty and and grace and kindness that ordinary people enact. So it's in a way. I was discussing this with Meredith Monk sometime in the fall. We were talking, and we were both talking about the same thing. It's to even feel a certain kind of happiness or joy. You know, like what does one have the right to do that, or should we preserve that? Or how can we do that and not feel guilty about it in the midst of all that is going on around us? But I think all religions, and in her case Buddhism, and in terms of my own philosophy also, I think it's important to have a part of yourself that and even Patti Smith talks about this in one of her recent books. I'm a big admirer of her writing. You just need that some part of yourself. Actually, Alan Capro wrote about this decades ago, and when he wrote about John Cage in an essay called Right Living, he talked about the beautiful privacy of the artist. So artists, individuals, everybody, there's some part of yourself that you need to preserve and create out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a certain kind of joy, or a certain kind of happiness that Hannah Arendt as well talks about, loving the world. You know, so some people can't do that. Some people manage to do it. But that, for me, is sort of the question, one of the questions now, our attachment to the world in the midst of trying to solve so many problems and coming out of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the thing is art transforming people? You know, are we transformed by the act of, you know, drawing? You also write about drawing, performance drawings, which you like very much. Are we transformed, the singer on the stage, or is the artist who does it, or is we the audience? You know, and what do you think is the essence of art?
Yeah, I mean, an audience is definitely transformed, but so is the artist. I mean, John Cage referred to it as the self-alteration of the artist. Perhaps you could say that's another form of self-improvement, which is a big American theme. But he talked about it as self-alteration for the artist. I think we're moved by everything. It doesn't have to be art, but there are extraordinary works that are sublime. I mean, before the lockdown, I guess it was a year and a half ago, I'm not quite sure. I saw Anne-Therese de Keersmacher's work at the Skirball, and I've seen her work also at similar pieces at Brooklyn Academy of Music. I mean, it was absolutely sublime and transporting. There are works like that. I think William Kentridge.
Yeah, I know you're a big fan of Kentridge.
Yes, I am. I followed his work for years. His Head and the Load, which was done at the Armory about 2 years ago, it was another extraordinary work that required even new inventions of new kinds of projection equipment and lenses. Worked with music and text, highly political with projected drawings. I'd become, over the last decade or dozen years, very interested in performance and drawing. And often my research interests come into the journal. So we've been publishing for a dozen years now, these portfolios on performance and drawing. Many artists have practice of drawing and making studies before they produce a work, some people say, like Joan Jonas, she's famous for that, draws in the work itself. Um, and there's actually recently a new book out called Performance Drawing, and I wrote the foreword to it. It came out from Bloomsbury in London just in September. And it has many chapters and things on artists and drawing. So I love work on paper. You could say writing is that in a sense, but
Yeah.
Bob Wilson's work is works on paper, because he draws his whole theatrical work before it's staged. He basically stages his drawing, so he has a visual book.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm interested in these things and bringing these kinds of new ideas into the journal, things about notation and drawing. I'm interested in notebooks and
drawing
whole
is
process.
it's an action. I think Roland Barthes also became, later in his life, he loved Japanese, ink drawings. He said it's an action with your body in a moment, and it also represents something in the sign or word. Often signs in Asian languages, there is something that is so deeply connected, to
Yeah, even John Berger, the great critic, he also has a book on drawing, and he drew. So many people have this practice. I don't draw actually, but I just,
Yeah, but you're right. So you would encourage people to take up writing as a form, right? For students, artists.
You
don't do that anymore as much as we should, everybody.
Artists, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we used to have many more artists used to write about their work, and that's kind of unfortunate now. I love artists' writings. A lot of visual artists write about their work, or novelists write, but theater people don't really write so much about their work. There are very few books. Not to mention all the histories and monographs and things we're missing in the theater field because of people's move into theory and into other kinds of studies. The monograph and the history that used to be written, in the 60s, 70s, whatever, they have fallen by the wayside. So we don't have a comprehensive history of the Judson theater, which encompassed the Judson poets as well as Judson dance. We don't have a history of La Mama, of the public theater, of theater, so many different theaters and so many different artists should have biographies written about them in many critical books. Our major artists, yeah.
And one day people might, find old hard drives and will try to recover deleted versions of things was used to be written on paper. I think always, you talk about history and the significance of it, on even in PAJ, the places where your offices were, the places where theater was, the idea of history and represented also in theater. I think you have a deep sense of almost of as a mission or as a obligation. And so what is your relation to that concept of history? What does it represent to you?
It's funny. One of the colleges I applied to in high school was to go as a history major, but I ended up becoming having another major. But I guess I'm interested in history because I'm a traveler, and I love knowing about histories and cultures, and it was always intrigued me when I was teaching that often people confuse history and nostalgia. It's a very big difference between having a historical perspective on a field or topic or theme than just having a more sentimental or kitschy or nostalgic feeling, though one could have nostalgia too, that's fine. But people are very wary about history and don't care about it so much anymore. And I think it's considering the complexity of the world, and suddenly look at the resurgence of discussion about authoritarianism and and fascism and all that, if you don't know that, or you don't know 20th century history, it'd be hard to create work out of that, or to grapple with ideas today. Some of the books I've been reading lately, Twilight of Democracy, The Seductive Lure of Authoritarianism, Anne Applebaum's book, or Masha Gessen's Surviving Autocracy. I mean, these are the kind of books that are, that are important to read now. So with regard to the arts on a different level, we talked earlier about the idea of having documents or archives. That's a big issue now, in terms of the materials that are saved from all this 50-year period. Many artists are placing or in the process of, or have already put their archives in different institutions. And that's our lasting record. PAJ, when it started out, so much of that theater downtown was just becoming known. So we made a lot of that work known in our journal, or as TDR did. And now we're in the process of people writing about performance history, which is the history of this. So now we have 45, 50, 60 years of this history, and that's a big field of scholarship. A lot of people are dealing with some of the major figures in the post-war period, and resuscitating them, or having more scholarly works on him, for example, on the Judson Dance period, or Yvonne Rainer, or Charlotte Moorman, or Nam June Paik, or Carolee Schneemann. A lot of it is happening within the visual arts and performance worlds, where people are suddenly, are producing more historical works and more essays, and especially in that field. Charlotte Moorman is a case in point too. So I think people are in scholarship, certain people in scholarship, historians, are very interested in retelling the histories of these fields. So I'm concerned with the curriculum and with what students learn now, and restoring more of a sense of the history of the great art forms, as well as social and political history, because I don't see how we can have a serious theater without people and training changing.
Yeah, we need to know where we come from, to know where we are going to, and then we have said it before here. Someone said it's important to know about history, because then you learn that people don't learn from history. Otherwise you wouldn't know that. So it's a great contribution in a way, and also that kind of split you do make as the art, as you said, as such an intimate, personal practice as a human being. It's such an individual experience, but also that it's kind of connected, to global history and national history, that there is a way to, to put arms around it, and those arms are a little bit bigger. I remember you commented on Bob Wilson, said Jack Benny was so great on TV because his arms weren't so big, so they would fit in the TV screen. So we should have longer arms, and these long arms of history. I think you really, in your work with PAJ, it's a great long poem of 100 and more issues that is, collecting.
Thank you.
Polyphonic voices that talk to each other, and they're all alone, little islands, like Edouard Glisson's idea of the archipelagos, which I love so much. So they're little islands, but altogether they are, an archipelagos. And I think this is what you created. I also know, and I wanted to ask you that, the symbolic act of an actor on a stage, and I would like to go to something specific, because I know you love singers. I know you're a big fan of Judy Garland and other, and tell us a bit about that. You go to and see them. Why is that significant? What does it mean that a person on a stage who sings, what does it mean to you? Tell us a bit about your yeah. And I know you're a music lover.
Yeah, I know I do love singers, but it reminds me of something that Philip Glass said when he was asked what Einstein on the Beach means. He said, it's not important what it means. I don't know what it means, but the important thing is that it's meaningful. So I don't know what singing means. The thing about it is it's mysterious. You don't see it. And this incredible voice comes out of people. You think of Maria Callas or where does that voice come from? That it's so incredible an act. It's invisible and it just comes out of a person's mouth and breath. I've always loved singers. I grew up at a time when a lot of singers had their own television shows, all the American singers. And so I was very familiar with the American songbook. And even now, and I love, Ella Fitzgerald or the young Barbra Streisand or Edith Piaf. And I mean, there's so many singers. I've always been a great music lover. So I listen to a lot of music. I have music, a lot of it from other cultures, when I'm traveling, I'm buying things, at that time CDs. I don't listen with ear pods, and I don't have like a playlist or anything. I like music in the open air, but I'm very interested also in singers' gestures. And it's interesting to watch the singers who grew up or who became known before microphones, how much they use their arm and their elbows, or comparing the way singers, like the way Peggy Lee moves as opposed to someone like, Judy Garland, or you could mention any singers. I also follow very much, when I can, younger singers. I thought that Amy Winehouse was incredible, Billie Holiday. I love her work, and Amy Winehouse was singing in that style. Tony Bennett is a great singer, and the show that she did with Lady Gaga was so intriguing. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I just have always loved music and singers. We did in my family where I grew up. My father always sang around the house, and we all played musical instruments. I played piano. I have a piano in my apartment, though I don't play so much anymore. I don't write about singers all that much, but I mean, I've written a lot about Meredith Monk. Not, but more about her theater than her particular voice, but her voice is her theater. And I have written about Barbra Streisand and Judy Garland and other singers and musicians.
Of course, you could see them all live in the beginnings of careers or end of careers, which we can't go back.
Yeah, I know. I wrote about early jazz at the same time I was going to graduate school, about blues or jazz and blues and things like that. So I mean, I go to the opera. I love that transcendent feeling of the great voices. I used to go to musical theater when there were more of the like Sondheim musicals and things like that, when some of the great musicals were on Broadway, though I don't really go anymore. But I saw a lot of the I've seen a lot of the great performers, musical comedy performers, and great Broadway stars like Ethel Merman or Gwen Verdon. It was possible to see these people, or Streisand on Broadway, some of the old stars. In a way, I have to say that I really feel like a very eclectic performance person, because I can enjoy any of that work or any of the standard traditional songbook just as much as I can enjoy something downtown or something experimental. I never really distinguished between things. I love virtuosity and great talent, and everything is interesting. Even if you watch an old movie, the way people speak or their gestures, it feeds into an idea of acting and performance.
I know
So,
you wrote a piece about the Corona time about duck soup, right? The Marx Brothers that somehow relates to where we are, right?
well, yeah, I wrote in an editorial in PAJ that sometimes the Trump world reminds me of an old Vitkevich play, or duck soup is one of these things that take place in a fictional country where all these ministers are trying to satisfy this, crazed ruler. Yeah, hopefully we'll be out of that soon.
Out of that soon, but it is a remarkable, to see you, a trained, so they're great, but also your interest in novel and painting and sculpture and film and music and performance, the highbrow, the lowbrow, what David Safran also, wrote about. So I think it's quite something to learn. As we coming closer to the end of our talk, and of course it should be much longer or different versions of it. I think we just scratched the surface, but if you would see the young Bonnie Marranca, who's just getting into Hunter College now, has her I don't know, most probably you didn't have a backpack at the time. You had it.
No.
Yeah, you had a little suitcase.
A little book bag, probably.
Book bag, and it would be times of Corona and this incredible change, that has taken place, which we're in the middle of, I mean, it's just the fact American Theater magazine from TCG is closed. It's now we fully realize what it means, and so much has moved from the digital. It's the greatest of great changes right now in the moment. What would you say to that young Bonnie Marranca? What you wish you would have known then, but you know now, but you didn't know then at the time, but also in the time we live in now, what do you feel is of importance and significance?
Well, that's a number of different questions.
Yeah.
I think when you're young, you're just kind of follow one foot in front of the other. I mean, I personally had no grand plan or anything. I don't live my life that way. I believe in that if you have beliefs in something, you should follow what you want to do and try to do it against all odds. Of course, people said, "Oh, you're crazy to start a journal," and we didn't listen to anybody. You just have to find a way to do what you want to do and to be happy in your life. And then because you have to wake up every day for 50, 60 years and work. So you have to love what you're doing. As far as any kind of topics now, if I were a young student going, one topic that interests me, even though I say that I want to preserve a certain kind of joy and feel that we have a right to also keep that for ourselves, some part of our life. I'm very interested in the 20th century kinds of artworks that deal with the catastrophic imagination. So that's another side and something different. But just in summing up an answer to you, I would say what I've always loved is and this is kind of my motto, and I discovered it somewhere along in the early 70s or mid 70s. Hannah Arendt said that artworks clearly are superior to all living things. They stay longer in the world than anything else. And since they stay longer in the world than anything else, they are the worldliest of things. And I always keep that close to me. And I believe in art and its power to transform people's inner lives and as a driving spirit and force in the world. Not enough to change the world, but to be part of that change because it changes people. And so I have favorites that spoke so deeply about art and politics and culture and philosophy. People like Václav Havel or Camus, as I said. Hannah Arendt has been so important to my thinking. So I think we all have our touch stars, and they keep us going, and we just keep going day after day after day and try to pursue what's important to us.
Yeah. I remember you quote Václav Havel, who had to hide, as you wrote, some of his manuscripts in trees. You write so about trees, about Wilson's work with trees, and from Glance to the forest in Orlando, and Hamlet Machine, and the watermill trees, the beautiful ones. But it stuck with me, that idea that you quoted Havel, also a philosopher, statesman, who combined so much, of that's what is important. And I don't fully remember the quote, but he maybe I'll find it somewhere.
The quote was something about, the world has its reality, and but we can't, and so does political life and the political order. But that is not all of our world. We have our own subjective world also, and we can't depend on these other systems to keep us going or to change the world. In other words, we have to change ourselves. He talked about a lot of these things in this very influential essay, The Power of the Powerless, or Living in Truth, his famous book. And also Georg Simmel, the sociologist, much earlier in the 20th century, talked about like objective reality and subjective reality. We are always living on two layers. There's the world outside, and there's also what kind of forces and life energy that we have to bring to the world. And we can't always be blaming the system or the outside world. We have to, I think we've come to that point now, seeing that we are more responsible than ever in creating this world. We cannot just leave it up to, government and different systems. There's another reality beyond that we inhabit, and that kind of moral force has to come from within us.
As artists have to help it. I think I found the quote, and I would like to end with it. And he imagined, as you wrote, a moral reconstitution of society, which means a radical renewal of the relationship of human beings to what I call the human order, which no political order can replace. A new experience of being, a renewed rootedness in the universe, a newly grasped sense of higher responsibility, a newfound inner relationship to other people and the human community. These factors clearly indicate the direction in which we must go. And this is really quite a statement. It's significant, and I think your work in PAJ, your teaching, your work, your time you spend in your gardens and upstate, this is, I think you do follow these kind of new steps what Havel out about. You made a great contribution, and you continue to make it in the future. So in the name of the community, the theater community, of course, I would like to thank you for what you have done. I, as a student, read PAJ, just looking at the images, always read all the essays as I should, as you said. People don't read the journals anymore. I'm one of those who just read what was, and then in this, but they were guiding lights in that star. If you really think of the heaven and the stars, and there's some with your little boats where people oriented themselves. It was one of those great shining stars, in the sense of shining. It was so important, and it is important, and to be in there meant something. It means something. So it's also for us to have been represented there. Really, thank you for your work. And editing is an art form, and you are, so you're an artist in what you do, and so it's a way of practicing art and writing. So yeah.
Thank you, Fred, for your generous conversation and your comments. I really enjoyed talking with you today.
Yeah, no, really, we got a sense of Bonnie Marranca. So she's out there. Email her, call her, harass her with articles. Get inspired by her writing. Do your own writing. Say why everything is so terribly and wrong what she does, and write manifestos against PAJ. This is what we miss. Find your voice, the one we talked about. And writing actually can help us, as does drawing or singing. As she said, join us again tomorrow. We have the Ailimite company, a young company coming out of the Living Theater, a company that is out there on the streets, a very diverse company. I wish we had the great Judith Malina with us. We were such good friends. She came so often to the Segal Center. The only thing she came to in New York, when she was in the old age home out in New Jersey, she took a car and drove there. Brad would bring her and we would talk. So we really miss her. It would have been so important to hear what she had to say. But let's see what that young company does, which is out there on the streets in Brooklyn, protesting against pipelines that are supposed to go through neighborhoods and other things. They just did the Camus reading with us at the White Box. Revolt in Asturias, where Camus warned against the ghosts of fascism, that are only detected. It started at an election night. And then the great Nuyorican Poetry Cafe we will have on Friday, Daniel and artists, spoken word artists, and we will hear from the community. How is that going for them this time of Corona? But again, Bonnie, thank you. I hope I didn't take you too long. The great HowlRound, thank you for having us, for hosting us, Thea and VJ. It means the world to us. And this was, I think, an inspiring conversation. And yeah, this will inspire me to write. Maybe I'm always also a bit shy to do it and say, what does it mean? But listening to you, we have to find our voices, and it's important what we do and to do some drawings here and there. So thank you, Bonnie. Good.
Thank you.
What's for lunch today or for dinner? You're a cook. What's
Oh, well, I'm trying to stay away from pasta. I had some yesterday, but I just made some sauce. But I like watching the cooking shows too, even if I don't have to eat it all. It's something with performance. You don't have to see everything, but reading about it sometimes is good.
Sometimes helps, And what's the difference a day later? Did you eat it and you saw that?
No, I ate it all.
Show, what is the memory in the mind? I know you wrote a whole book about pasta, so I know you are a big fan of it. So all the best, and I hope we will get together soon and have great holidays. And thank you all for listening. And what Bonnie talks about, it is not, that we just know about her and we congratulate and celebrate her work, but it is really in the sense what she did about transforming the people, audiences, so that's meaningful to you. So there's something in there that is of significance. So you pick up a pen, write things down for 20 minutes a day, or write a friend, a mail or a letter, a good old letter. There are great poets projects out there. People say we go back to letter writing. People write themselves letter now by the mail, to not only to support the post office, but also as an artistic practice. So bye-bye, I should stop now. We always say it's about radical listening, and then I could go on talking. But it was a great conversation. Thank you, Bonnie. And
thanks so much. We wait for the snow.